You can't be here. Niles Brandt said it the way men say things when they're used to not being questioned, flat, final, already moving on to the next thought before the first one lands. He had a training lanyard around his neck, and the particular impatience of someone who has been having a bad morning and has decided to make it someone else's problem. The old man at the gate didn't move, didn't speak. His hands dropped against his thighs and stayed there loose, completely idle, while 20 feet behind Brandt, the dog hit the end of its long lead for the 4th time, and the handler went down on one knee in the dirt. "Sir, this is a closed session. Whatever your..." The old man's eyes had already moved past him, not to the handler, to the dog. He watched it the way you watch something you already understand. "Sir, I said the field is closed." Bruce Hoffman took one step back, not in retreat, the way a man steps back to look at a thing properly, to give it the space it needs to be seen. He reached into his shirt and brought out the rosary. It was dark, nearly black from handling, the beads worn so smooth they caught no light. Each one rubbed nearly flat along its face. The cross at the end was small and plain, the kind you couldn't identify by denomination at 20 feet. He didn't hold it up or look at it. He just found one bead with his thumb and let it sit there, pressed into the pad of his finger, and he turned his attention back to the field. 20 feet behind Niles Brandt, the dog was going again. A Belgian Malinois, maybe 85 pounds, and every ounce of it was committed to the idea of taking the handler off his feet. The long lead snapped taut, and the handler stumbled forward and corrected, and the dog came around and hit the end of it again, slamming sideways into the lead like the rope itself had insulted him. 3 weeks of this, according to the session sheets posted on the equipment gate that Bruce had read on his way in, not because anyone had shown them to him, but because they were there, and he read everything he walked past. Habit, old one. Brandt was still talking. Bruce was not listening to Brandt. He was watching the dog cycle through the agitation, the way it moved, the way it came off the redirect, not wild, not uncontrolled, but searching for something, an input it recognized, a frequency it had been tuned to and couldn't find anymore. The handler was doing everything technically correct, and the dog was doing everything technically wrong, and the problem was that neither of them was speaking the same language. Bruce had seen it before. He had seen it in another country, in another decade, in dogs that arrived at his program already half-shaped by someone else's hands. He pressed the bead under his thumb once, slow, and held it. "You're not hearing me." Brandt shifted his weight, putting himself back in Bruce's eyeline. Mid-30s, good posture, the confident frustration of a man who was usually the most qualified person in a room. This dog has a behavioral profile that our entire team has been working on for 3 weeks. It's not a spectator situation. Bruce's eyes moved to Brandt. Not quickly. He didn't need to. "I heard you," Bruce said, and then he looked back at the dog. That was when Wendell Landry walked through the side gate. He had the unhurried gait that comes from years spent learning not to arrive anywhere in a hurry, a habit that outlasts the reasons that built it. He stopped a few feet behind Brandt, took in the tableau Brandt mid-argument, the gray-haired figure in the faded canvas shirt, one hand quiet at his side. The rosary barely visible between finger and thumb, and something shifted in Wendell's expression. Not surprise. Something quieter than that. A small, careful attention. He did not walk away. He did not say anything either. He just stood there in the space between them and watched Bruce watch the dog, and his eyes moved once to the worn beads and then back to the field, and whatever he was thinking, he kept it to himself. The dog hit the end of the lead again. The handler called a correction, and the dog ignored it completely. Bruce's thumb moved to the next bead, slow, one press. The way you mark something off that you are keeping count of, that you are not willing to lose track of. The lake sat flat and gray at the edge of the tree line, and the pines barely moved, and the morning had the particular quiet of a place that doesn't know yet what is about to happen inside it. Wendell had said 3 words to Brant. Just 3. Let him watch. Then he'd turned and walked back toward the timing line without explaining himself, and Brant had stood there a beat too long before moving off. His irritation, the kind that needs an audience to fully form. Bruce found a camp stool near the fence post at the field's north corner and sat down. He did not ask if that was acceptable. He simply sat, and nobody came back to move him. The dog was a Belgian Malinois, big for the breed, maybe 78-80 pounds, with the particular muscle density that accumulates in working dogs pushed hard from a young age. A good dog. You could see that just watching it breathe. The problem wasn't the dog. The problem was that whoever had started this animal's foundation work had built it in a language these trainers had never been taught to speak. And so every session became a conversation between 2 people who had entirely different words for the same things. Bruce watched it work the long lead. He watched the pivot points the moment before the lunge, the specific ear position when the handler raised his voice, the way the dog's hind legs loaded differently on the left side, an old injury maybe, or just a compensation pattern from a harness that hadn't fit right early on. He filed all of it, no notebook, no phone out. Just watching, his elbows on his knees, his hands hanging loose between them, palms down against his thighs. After the 3rd run, he took the rosary out. He didn't hold it up. He didn't look at it. He just ran 1 bead under the pad of his right thumb and let his eyes stay on the dog. The beads were dark brown ox blood originally, but so many years of handling had deepened them past that into something closer to charcoal. Each bead worn almost oval now, the facets long gone. A few of the links had been resoldered at some point, thicker than the originals, mismatched. The repair job of a man who knew nothing about rosaries but was not willing to let it fail. That repair wasn't his work. It had come to him that way. Glenn Krupa had carried this thing through 2 deployments before the 3rd one, had worn it on the wrist under his sleeve during K9 certification, which was technically against uniform regs, and Bruce had looked the other way because there are things a man carries that have nothing to do with regulations. Krupa had been 23, one of the best handler candidates Bruce had ever put through the program, that specific kind of patient that is not passivity but deliberate control, the kind that working dogs respond to the way they respond to gravity. The notification had come through on a Tuesday. Bruce had been in the middle of an evaluation at Fort Bragg, and the senior NCO had pulled him off the field and told him quietly. And Bruce had walked back onto the field and finished the evaluation because there was nothing else to do, and the dog in front of him still needed something from him, and that had always been enough to keep a man moving. Krupa's mother had mailed him the rosary 6 months later with a note that said simply, "He would have wanted you to have it." Bruce didn't know if that was true, but he'd kept it anyway. The lake behind the field had gone from gray to a pale, flat silver as the morning pushed forward. Bruce could see it between the pine trunks. He had a particular feeling about lakes in the Carolinas at this hour. Not peace, exactly, more like a held breath. A quality of light that didn't ask anything from you, which was different from comfort but sometimes worked the same way. His thumb moved to the next bead. The dog hit the end of the lead again and spun, and Bruce watched it, and the trainer shouted, and his hands stayed exactly where they were. "All right," Brant said. "I've been patient. He crossed the field with his arms already open, like a man who'd rehearsed this. The rest of the team was still working the long lead, or trying to, but they'd gone quieter than they should have, which meant they were listening. Bruce looked up from the camp stool. Not fast, not slow. 3 weeks, Brant said. 3 weeks of me letting you sit there because Wendell said leave it. But we just burned another 2-hour session, and that dog has not made a single reliable contact. And I am not going to keep running this op with a civilian audience." So, he stopped, planted himself about 6 feet out. "One credential. Give me one thing that earns you a seat. Here." Behind him, the dog was on its tie-out now, pacing a short arc. 4 steps, pivot, 4 steps back. The whine it made was thin and high and continuous, not aggression, not quite. Something closer to confusion, like a machine running a program that keeps failing to resolve. Bruce let the silence sit a moment. Not to be difficult. He just didn't appear to feel any particular urgency about it. I was in the army, he said. Brant's jaw moved. So were a lot of people. Yeah, Bruce agreed. That was it. That was the whole answer. He turned back toward the dog, his forearms resting on his thighs, hands loose, and watched the animal pace through its short, taut circuit. Brant looked at the team. A couple of them were carefully focused on nothing. One younger handler had a hand up near his mouth. Sir, Brant's voice had dropped into the register men use when they're trying to be calm and aren't quite managing it. This is a private facility operating under contract. We have a dog that has washed out of every contact protocol we've run, a client deadline in 11 days, and I need this field clear of people who are not contributing. What's he doing with his rear legs? Brant stopped. Bruce hadn't raised his voice or changed his posture. The question had come out flat, almost incidental, directed at no one in particular, aimed somewhere in the middle distance between Brant and the dog. What? Brant said. His rear legs. When he comes off the pivot, Bruce's chin lifted a fraction toward the tie-out. Left rear drops about a half second behind. You've been watching it for 3 weeks. What do you think that is? Brant turned and looked at the dog. You could see him not wanting to. You could see the moment he found what Bruce was pointing at, the slight, rhythmic hesitation, the hind leg touching down late in a way that was barely visible unless you knew to look, or unless you'd been looking at nothing else for 4 sessions straight. Could be Brant started. It's not a physical issue, Bruce said. He's been cleared. You checked him out week 1. A pause. It's a sequencing problem. He's waiting for a sound that isn't coming. Brant faced him again, and whatever he'd come out here to say had shifted to something else in his expression. Not softened, recalibrated. What sound? He said. Bruce didn't answer right away. His thumb moved, just barely, against the side of his thigh, the same small motion he made with the rosary, except his hands were empty now. His gaze had settled on the dog. The dog had stopped its pacing and stood where the arc ran out, facing toward the lake, ears up, tail low. That, Wendell said from somewhere behind them both, quietly, is a very good question. Nobody answered it. The dog lowered its head toward the water and whined once, high and clean, and the sound traveled out across the flat gray surface and went nowhere. Brant moved first. He turned away from the lake and walked back toward the shade canopy where the team kept their gear, and when he came back, he had a manila folder in his hand, thick enough that the edges had already begun to curl from humidity. He held it up without opening it. 3 weeks, he said. You want credentials? I'll show you credentials. He pulled the first page and held it out not to Bruce, to the group. A training log, columns of dates, handler names, session durations, failure notations in red ink, running margin to margin. Duke Shepherd, 4 years old, Belgian Malinois, former patrol dog out of Fayetteville. Passed basic obedience and man-trailing before he was 6 months out of puppy testing. Brant flipped a page. Then something happened. Nobody knows what. Redlined on advanced agitation. Redlined on recall under drive. 3 separate handlers, 2 of them certified at the master level. 3 weeks of daily sessions. Another page. Every single one. See. He closed the folder. So whatever you think you've been watching from that stool, the answer isn't out there. We have run every protocol that exists for a dog this age with this behavioral history. The animal is compromised. That's the clinical determination. We're 2 days from recommending retirement. Bruce had not moved during any of this. His hands were flat against his thighs. His eyes were on the dog. The dog Duke had gone back to his tie-out after the morning session, and now he was pacing the full length of his line in short, tight arcs, head low, shoulder muscles rolling. Not agitation exactly, more like something unresolved. a frequency he was tuned to that nobody in range was transmitting. Brant looked at Bruce, waiting for something. Pushback, deference, an apology. He got none of it. Compromised, Bruce said quietly. Not a question, not a challenge. Just the word, held up briefly and set back down. Wendell Landry was standing 6 feet to Brant's left. He had not said anything since the folder came out. His phone was in his hand at his side. He had not raised it, had not made a production of it, but his thumb was moving on the screen in short, careful intervals. The way a man searches for something he is not quite sure he remembered correctly. He had caught 2 words Bruce had murmured to the dog earlier that morning. He had not been meant to hear them. He had been downwind and close to the Pine Row, and Bruce's voice had carried in the flat air off the lake, low and unhurried, almost private. 2 words in a cadence that was not English. Wendell had heard a phrase like that exactly once before. 7 years ago, in a windowless room at Fort Bragg, in a joint briefing that ran 4 hours and required a specific clearance he no longer held. A liaison officer had referenced a K-9 conditioning protocol used for high-value target operations, language-paired commands that anchored behavioral responses at the neurological level, designed so that a dog could be worked by allied units without full handler continuity. The program had a designation. He could not remember the full designation. He remembered the briefing officer saying the method was developed internally and was not documented in any open field manual. He remembered thinking it sounded improbable. He remembered being wrong about that. His thumb stopped. The search result he was looking at was partial, an indirect reference in a declassified procurement record. Almost nothing. But the partial was enough. The 2 words cross-referenced against that program designation, against that unit, against that specific window of deployment cycles. Wendell did not look up from his phone yet. Brant was still talking, still building his case from the manila folder, page by page, red notation by red notation, the way a man argues with a door that is already opened. Duke paced his line and whined low. The lake held its color and gave nothing back. Brant had the file open. He was holding it up the way people hold things when they want you to feel the weight of what you don't know. 3 certified handlers, he said. 6 weeks of combined work. 2 with bite sport backgrounds. 1 with military police experience. The dog has broken all of them. He let that land. So whatever you think you're seeing from over here, whatever retired hobby knowledge you're bringing to my field, I need you to understand that this animal is not a project. It is a documented failure. And there is nothing. Duke hit the end of the lead so hard the stake came out of the ground. Not a lunge. A full separation, the stake whipping sideways through the grass, the long line snaking behind it. And 48 pounds of Belgian Malinois, covering the distance between the tie-out and the group in the time it took Brant to drop the file. 2 of the younger trainers scrambled left. 1 went down on a knee. Someone shouted something that didn't help. Bruce was already moving. Not fast, not urgent. He stepped forward the way you step into a room you've walked 1,000 times. Weight forward on the left foot, right hand coming up open-palmed and low, below the dog's eyeline. His left hand dropped flat against his thigh and stayed there. The rosary was in his shirt pocket, and he did not touch it. He didn't need to. The dog hit the edge of his reach, and Bruce said something. 2 words, maybe 3, low enough that only the people within arm's reach caught any of it, a sound that was not English, not quite anything the younger trainers could place. A phrase that moved in the mouth differently than any command they'd been taught. The vowels long and soft, where military commands were usually clipped. Duke stopped. Not slowed, not redirected. Stopped all 4 feet, mid-stride, the forward momentum bleeding out of him, the way air goes out of something. He stood there a full second with his head down, chest heaving, and then he dropped. Saturday, directly in front of Bruce's left boot. 4 seconds, maybe less? Nobody moved. Brant had one hand braced against the tailgate of the equipment truck, the file on the ground in front of him, pages beginning to lift in the light wind off the lake. His eyes moved from the dog to Bruce, then back to the dog, his mouth slightly open. Whatever sentence he'd been building now, completely gone. Wendell lowered his phone. He'd been holding its screen down since before Brant started talking. He looked at Duke, sitting quiet and low in front of Bruce. He looked at Bruce's hands still dropped, still idle against his thighs. Nothing performed, nothing wasted. Then he looked at the back of Bruce's head, and his expression shifted into something that was not surprise exactly, but closer to the feeling of a thing you half knew becoming the thing you knew. Bruce crouched. He let Duke smell his right hand. He said something else quieter, 2 syllables, the kind of sound you'd make to a dog you'd known a long time. Duke's head came up slow. His breathing evened. One of the younger trainers said very quietly, "What did he say to it?" Nobody answered. The wind moved through the pine row. The lake sat flat and gray behind all of it. Brant picked up the file, and then seemed to forget why he'd picked it up and set it back down. He took 1 step backward, just one, unconscious, the kind of step a man takes when something underneath him has moved without warning. Bruce didn't look at him. He was watching the dog. The dog came in low and fast, lead whipping behind it like a broken tail. 90 pounds of Belgian Malinois, with 3 weeks of failed handling, wound up behind every stride. 2 trainers stepped back. One of the younger ones grabbed for a catch pole that wasn't there. Bruce stepped forward. Not fast, not slow, just forward, the way a man steps through a door he's opened 100 times before. His hands dropped flat against his thighs as the dog covered the last 10 yards. Someone behind him said something sharp and warning. He didn't register it. He waited until the dog was close enough that he could see the whites around its eyes. Then he spoke. Low, flat. A cadence that wasn't English, wasn't quite Arabic, wasn't quite Pashto. Something fused from both. A phrase built for a specific purpose in a specific program that had never been publicly named. The sounds came out of him with the ease of a man saying his own address. 4 syllables. A pause. 2 more. The dog hit the brakes like it had been bolted to the earth. Not slow, immediate. The aggression went out of it the way air goes out of something punctured, not violently, just gone. All 4 paws found the ground. The haunches dropped. The dog sat, chest heaving, eyes locked on Bruce's face with something that was not submission and was not fear. It was recognition. 4 seconds, maybe less. Nobody moved. Niles Brant was mid-word. He didn't finish it. His mouth stayed open for a moment, then closed, and he took 1 step backward, slow, involuntary. The kind of step a person takes when the footing beneath them turns out to be different from what they thought. Bruce crouched down in front of the dog. 1 deliberate movement, no wasted motion. He let the animal come to him on its own terms, and it did put its nose against the back of Bruce's hand and exhaled there, long and heavy, like it had been waiting to do exactly that. Wendell Landry had gone pale. His eyes dropped to his phone, then cut to Bruce, then back down again. He lowered it slowly. Niles. His voice was quiet enough that only the people immediately around them heard. That phrase he used. Brant turned. His jaw was tight. What about it? I heard it once. One time. Joint briefing, classified setting, around 2013. Wendell paused, choosing what to say and how much. There was a program, SF, attached. Built specifically for high-value target operations dogs paired with allied foreign units. Handlers trained to issue commands in language-matched sequences so the dog would respond to local partner forces without breaking conditioning. He stopped again. They called it a dual key system. The phrase he used is part of that, not a variation of it, the actual sequence. Brant's eyes shifted to Bruce. There were maybe a dozen people who could have written that sequence, Wendell continued. Less than that who actually ran the training. It was never published, never replicated outside the program. He tucked the phone into his vest pocket. The briefing I was in Someone referred to the program lead as Master Sergeant Hoffman. I never saw a face to go with it. The field was completely silent now. The lake sat flat and gray at the edge of everything, and somewhere across the water a single bird called once and went quiet. Bruce hadn't turned around. He was still crouched in front of the dog, one hand resting easy on its flank, the dog's breathing slowing under his palm. His other hand had gone to his shirt pocket without his seeming to notice two fingers touching something there, not pulling it out, just resting against it. Brandt looked at the back of the old man's neck. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. Bruce moved to the tie-out stake and picked up the lead without any ceremony. He didn't look at Brandt. He didn't look at anyone except the dog. The animal was on its feet, weight shifting forward, a low, continuous sound coming from its chest that wasn't quite a growl, more like pressure looking for a direction. Bruce let the lead run loose through his fingers. He gave it slack instead of taking it up, and the dog's head tilted a fraction, reading that. 3 weeks, Wendell said quietly, moving to Bruce's left. Not a challenge, just a marker. I know. Bruce kept his eyes on the dog. They were running hard corrections every time it showed agitation. Terminal phase command, no approach sequence, no language bridge. The dog wasn't breaking down. It was responding correctly to a syntax it was built on. He paused. When your commands don't match the architecture, the dog fills the gap with the only behavior that makes sense to it. Aggression is a reasonable answer to confusion. Wendell absorbed that, said nothing. Bruce stepped closer, unhurried, and spoke a short phrase, 4 syllables. Arabic root with a Pashto tonal inflection on the second beat, a cadence no manual published anywhere had ever listed. The dog's ears dropped back, not in fear, in recognition. It settled its weight onto its haunches and looked at Bruce the way a dog looks at the person it was built around. That's the approach marker, Bruce said. Before any command, before any expectation, you tell it the shape of the conversation before you start talking. He glanced at Wendell once. Your guys were skipping it, probably didn't know it existed. He worked through the sequence over the next hour, methodical, no flourishes. Each command built on the one before it, the dog moving through obstacles and hold and release patterns with a fluency nobody on that field had seen from it in 3 weeks. Brandt stood at the edge of the cleared area. He had not spoken since the dog sat down. He watched with his arms crossed, and then, after a while, with his arms at his sides. Wendell kept pace with Bruce at a respectful distance, and Bruce talked through it as he worked, not explaining for an audience, just accounting for what he was doing the way a man accounts for a repair while he's making it. The aggression spikes at the bite sleeve. They ran the sleeve work before conditioning was seated. The dog associates the sleeve with failed commands now. You'd have to rebuild that association from the ground up before any protection work is going to hold. He put the dog through a long track, voice low and level, and the animal ran it clean. Give it 2 weeks with proper sequencing. It'll come back. 2 weeks, Wendell repeated. Maybe less. Where do I find the full protocol? Bruce's hands moved along the lead, slow and idle. You don't. It was oral transmission only, deliberate. Command syntax that lives in a file can be captured. Wendell looked at him. We ran paired language systems through allied units, Bruce said, his voice going quieter, not lower. Afghan National Army dog teams, ANA handlers, worked alongside our people. The commands had to function across 2 languages without a dictionary and without written record. If a handler was compromised, the syntax died with him. He let the dog work the long run. Watched it move, except when it didn't. The last 3 words were not for Wendell. His right hand came off the lead for a moment, dropped to his thigh, and one thumb pressed against the front of his shirt, not reaching inside, just resting there. A pressure through fabric that only he could feel. Then his hand returned to the lead. The dog ran the full length of the pine row and turned back to him at a call he hadn't needed to raise his voice to make. Wendell waited until the dog was calm on the lead before he asked. He didn't make a thing of it, just walked up beside Bruce and watched the animal settle, and then said quietly, whose unit sent him through. Originally, Bruce didn't answer right away. He looked out at the lake. The water had gone flat in the late afternoon, that particular gray-silver that happens when the light comes in low and the surface stops moving. He watched it the way he had watched it every morning from the camp stool, like it was the only thing out here that asked nothing of him. His right hand moved to the front of his shirt, not reaching inside, just resting there, 2 fingers pressed flat against the fabric. Then he reached in and took the rosary out. He held it in his palm, not running the bead this time, just holding it. The beads were nearly black with handling, worn to a flat smoothness that takes decades of the same motion to make. "Kid named Glenn Krupa," he said. "Kandahar, 2011. He paused. "Dog made it home." He didn't. Wendell didn't say anything. "Krupa was one of mine," Bruce said. "Certified through the program. Sharp kid, absorbed syntax faster than any handler I ever put through. He wrote my name as his next of operational contact for the K9 work. Not family contact, program contact." He turned the rosary once in his hand. His effects came home to his family. But this came to me. He looked down at it. Didn't know what to do with that for a while. A long breath out. "Then I figured you keep it. That's what you do. You keep it and you carry it and you don't put it down, because the moment you put it down, it means you forgot what it cost." Wendell looked at the dog. The dog was sitting at Bruce's left side, weight back, watching Bruce's face with the specific attentiveness of an animal that has found the right voice after a long time without it, not trained obedience. Something older than training. "That's why he responded," Wendell said. "It wasn't a question. The conditioning built into him goes back to handlers I certified. The syntax, the cadence, the exact command structure I built that protocol. I wrote it." Bruce's voice was flat and factual, no performance in it. "This dog has been hearing wrong syntax for 3 weeks. Every failed session reinforced that the commands meant nothing. He wasn't broken. He was waiting." He tucked the rosary back into his shirt pocket. The motion was unhurried and complete, the way a man closes a drawer that holds something irreplaceable. "Krupa would have figured it out in 20 minutes, he said. He had a feel for when an animal was frustrated versus when it was confused. Knew the difference. He looked back at the lake. That's the thing about good handlers. They don't force. They listen first and talk second. Behind them, Niles Brandt had not moved from where he'd stopped 40 minutes ago. He was still holding the training file. He had not opened it again. Bruce gave a short, low call, and the dog came to heel without a correction. "Walk him out once more," Bruce said, mostly to himself, and they went dog and old man moving down the pine road toward the flat gray edge of the lake, unhurried, the lead slack between them, the dog's head up and tracking forward instead of back. Wendell watched them go. He understood now what he was seeing. Not a demonstration, not a proof. Just a man and a dog that both knew what it was to be built by someone who wasn't here anymore, moving together in the late light while the lake held its silence and the pines stood dark along the water's edge. The others had packed up and gone. Truck doors closed somewhere in the trees. Engines turned over. The sound of tires on gravel faded until there was nothing left but the lake and the wind moving low across it and the dog sitting quiet on the grass where Bruce had left him. Wendell didn't move toward the parking area. He walked to the water's edge instead and looked out at the gray flat of it, the pines dark on the far bank, the last light doing nothing dramatic, just dimming. 4 seconds. 3 weeks of failure, and then 4 seconds. Not because Bruce Hoffman was exceptional. Because a dead 23-year-old had written his name on a form in Kandahar, and a dog still carried the shape of what that man had been taught. That was the whole of it. That was all it was. Wendell looked at the dog. The dog looked back at him, unhurried, ears soft. He said the name aloud, not to the dog, not to himself exactly, just to the air above the water, where names like that belong. Glenn Krupa. The lake didn't answer. The pines didn't move. But the dog's ears came forward once, slowly, like he'd heard something familiar in the shape of it.